Welcome to the top 10 frames that you just have to try. Nowadays, most players have an account just like mine, where you have maybe 6 to 10 frames that you play constantly, maybe even less frames. I know I can go weeks without changing frames, but Warframe is nothing short of variety. So today, we will shed some light on some great unique Warframes that can spice up that gameplay. Banjee, an absolute powerhouse of damage boosting, able to devastate the most powerful of foes. If you haven't tried Banjee yet, you definitely should. Although very commonly used in high level gameplay, very few new players ever consider giving her a go because of how niche or specific her builds can be. But don't let that stop you. Banjee's abilities are awesome, so let's give them a look. First we have Sonicboom. Sonicboom is a shockwave that damages all enemies in a cone shape in front of you. Then we have Sonar, the powerhouse of all powerhouses. Using this ability, Banjee finds and tracks down enemies in range, exposing weak points, which when shot do incredible damage. Spam this baby a few times and it doesn't matter what weapon you're using, you will obliterate them. Then we have Silence. Banjee surrounds herself in an aura that stuns enemies and reduces their perception. Great when you're stuck in a tough spot. And finally, we have Soundquake. Although taking a hit with a nerf in the past year, Soundquake is still an easy, devastating damage ability. Creating earthquakes with the palm of my hand? Yes please. If you're looking for a build for this amazing frame, down below in the description you will find a link to another video by Relentless Zen, which honestly opened my eyes to the possibilities of this frame. Wukong is an obscure frame to say the least, but with some abilities that honestly make this game way more fun. Primarily used in speedrunning, Wukong is a very interesting frame, boasting an amazing speed ability, high armor, 3 life fail-safes, and some very interesting mechanics. Once you try Wukong, you'll wonder why you hadn't tried it before. Wukong is more than his speed ability, however. Wukong's first ability is essentially a clone button. Wukong splits himself, creating a clone that will fight alongside you. If you have strong weapons, just saying, this clone can do some insane work. Then we've got Cloudwalker. In my opinion, what makes this frame what it is. As a speedrunner, I adore this ability. Wukong places himself in a cloud form, allowing him to fly through the battlefield, whilst healing himself and dazing and confusing enemies. But, if you don't like the cloud ability, there is always ability number 3. Which puts him in a state of damage absorption. After the duration runs out, this damage is then converted into increased armor, making him a tanky boy. Then we've got Wukong's ultimate. Personally, I don't enjoy it, but there is a strong community that loves this ability. Wukong pulls out his primal staff, allowing him to pump out insane damage with the correct mods and build. Overall, a great speedrunning frame and interesting altogether. The build used by speedrunners is linked below. Harrow. Boasting some awesome looking and fun CC abilities, Harrow is one of those frames that most people look past because of the no damage thing, but Harrow is by no means useless. Harrow's first ability I honestly adore. Casting Harrow's wand sends a wave of energy that chains up enemies as it comes across in a very pretty way. Super satisfying and gives a nice bit of control in a game full of big explosions and crazy things happening constantly. Now, while you've got them chained up, why not use your second ability? Harrow's second ability sacrifices shield, and in return, you get increased fire rate and reload. At the same time, any damage done by you heals teammates, and I reckon that's pretty cool. The more shields sacrificed, the more buff, which makes this one of the very few frames that really actually gets something out of having shields. Then we come to the poor man's trinity. Harrow tries, and fails, to boast an energy ability. Although not super powered, it is still very interesting and can be satisfying. So who knows, maybe you will enjoy it like I do. Lastly, we have Haros Covenant, which is what most people consider her only defining ability. Harrow protects nearby allies with a force that absorbs all damage and converts it to extra crit chance for everyone. To be honest, this frame does feel like 4 different support ideas were thrown out and they just decided to put it together. Synergy doesn't really exist. However, this doesn't remove the unique and fun elements of the individual abilities, something that I recommend everyone tries at least once. Oh boy, here we go. Brook. Quite a divisive frame to be sure. Upon release was absolutely ridiculed by the large majority of the community and to this day still struggles to get out of that shadow left from release. However, Brook is not only better than he used to be, he also happens to be one of the more unique frames in the game. A frame that has mechanics no other frame uses. Described as a pacifist frame, the whole theme is based around someone who normally avoids combat, but is extremely effective at it if needed to be. And as such, there are mechanics that go along with this theme. Obviously a pacifist frame, one of the abilities has to be some sort of evade or dodge. So, we have his first ability, allowing Brook to dodge all incoming projectiles whilst not fighting, which is honestly one of the more unique abilities in the game, requiring more thought than your average DPS ability. Lull comes up next, an ability focusing on calming enemies until they fall asleep. Pretty self-explanatory, goes with the theme well, but just feels like a placeholder ability because nothing else could be thought of. Not often built for, but def's always used. Desolate Hands summons a large amount of floating daggers that surround the player and shoot off at enemy weapons, disabling them if they get too close. And now the big finale, which is what has brought him back into the community. Serene Storm. Now Brook has a unique mechanic in a bar called Restraint. This restraint erodes the more fighting that takes place around him based on ability usage and other things. Once Brook loses his restraint, he can activate Serene Storm, this ability being the effective fighting that I mentioned earlier. The more this ability is used, the more Brook comes to his senses and restraint comes back. Although not the coolest of frames, it is definitely one of the more unique frames in Warframe, in my opinion, and if you want something to do, I'd suggest giving this a try. Mirage, the mystical and mysterious. Mirage's theme is one of performance, being all about mirrors, colourful displays and explosive pranks. Although it sounds silly, this translates into some of the more fun and amusing abilities in the game. Starting with something I'm sure all of you have seen at some point during your playtime, the Hall of Mirrors, which is Mirage's first ability. This ability creates an entourage of doppelgangers to confuse and distract the enemy. However, this isn't just for decoy or defense. These mirrored Mirages also shoot, doing a small percentage of the damage that the main frame is doing. Can create some amusing instances when used with specific weapons. This comes along with Sleight Hand, not the most commonly used in the game as it's very obscure and most people gloss over it. Sleight of Hand places traps on drops that may be lying about. These traps go off upon an enemy walking near it. This gives you some incentive to not pick up rewards and instead use them for more damage. Then we have Eclipse, which is starting to become more popular. Mirage gets one of 2 buffs. If in a lightly lit area, Mirage gets a nice juicy damage buff. But if those lights go out, Mirage gets some nice damage reduction. I enjoy this because it means you need to give some thought to the environment and where you want to fight instead of just how you will fight. Lastly, Prism. Not used too much nowadays after it used to be overpowered and got nerfed. Prism creates what is essentially a giant disco ball that shoots lasers in all directions, dealing damage. Activating this ability again will cause the disco ball to explode, blinding all nearby enemies. I feel like you will be seeing more of this frame as I am seeing it start being used more and more in the community, as people are coming to realize the potential of the damage buff. Get in before it's popular and give it a shot. Vauban. our engineer of the gods. Vauban has been through a loop, from being originally one of the hardest frames to farm, to being very commonly used, to then being thrown out and considered trash by most of the community, and then finally being reworked into what he is today. It's been a journey, but what has come out the other end is an enjoyable and unique frame that stands out from the crowd with some pretty fun mechanics. Although these abilities don't seem powerful in description, when used, Vauban can pump out some insane damage numbers. Starting with his one, the Tesla Novus, which can deploy a roller drone that attaches itself to enemies and delivers electric shocks and damage. Although it doesn't seem like it can do much, mixed with the augment, this thing absolutely destroys. Mine Layer is next, and is a lot of fun. Cycling between 4 abilities in one. One drags enemies to the casting position, one's like a turret, one gives a little run boost in the face direction, and Overdriver, which is last, is sort of like a little buffing ability. Then we got the big boy stuff. Photon Strike, absolutely my favourite. Essentially a giant fuck off laser from the gods. This thing does some awesome damage, not only that, but it partially scales too. But my favourite part about it is just how freaking cool it looks. I mean, come on. Lastly, there are 2 staples of Vauban's history and kit. The Bastille and Vortex. 2 abilities in one. One creates a wall that holds enemies in midair, while the other sucks everything into a giant death ball in the middle. Overall, Vauban is a very underrated frame for the work he can do in both solo and team settings, and definitely a frame to mess around with and see what you can come up with. This one is slightly odd, but it's definitely unique. Hildryn. The main thing that sets Hildryn apart is the fact that she has no energy and instead boosts an insane amount of shields that Hildryn consumes as its power source. So builds on Hildryn are much more unique than many other frames. Hildryn's abilities are a bit odd, but they can definitely pique someone's interest. Hildryn's first ability is a bit like Ember of Frost, it's basically just shooting an element. In this case it's bolts of fire. Not the most inspired idea, but hey, it looks kinda cool. Now we get to the unique stuff. Pillage. Pillage does pretty much what you would expect and pillages a percentage of enemy shields to replace its own. Due to the fact that Hildryn uses shields as an energy source, it's both essential for power consumption as well as keeping oneself alive. Haven comes next, and is a relatively unique ability, in which players and allies around Hildryn are given a shield aura from Hildryn. Enemies that get near players in this state will take damage. Lastly is Aegis Storm. Although this looks like it was meant to be the frame's defining ability, it doesn't really hold up. Hildryn takes to the skies and rains rockets down at the enemies. Enemies that are affected will drop energy orbs, which only really helps teammates, so that was an odd choice. Honestly, some questionable decisions for the design for Hildryn, but in the long run it has some unique mechanics that require you to plan your builds more accordingly, as well as manage shields and ability output. Something to keep your mind running, I guess. Nidus, a deadly plague with no cure. Nidus is in my opinion one of the most interesting and fun frames to play within Warframe, having only health and a system of stacks which practically no other frames have. Stacks or abilities that require management to be made stronger I believe should be a staple of most Warframes. However, for now, at least we have Nidus. So let's talk about the way he works. Upon enemies being hit with Nidus's first 2 abilities, Nidus will slowly gain stacks. As Nidus gets more stacks, he gets stronger, more health regen, and more power strength, meaning he kind of snowballs into an underrated powerhouse. These stacks are required and consumed upon activation of the 3rd and 4th ability, but outside that, if Nidus has over 15 stacks, he essentially has a free extra life. Instead of dying, Nidus just loses those stacks. So the abilities, really quick. Virulence sends a ripple of infested fungus that steals energy and damages them, this damage being multiplied by Nidus' stacks. Lava, spawning an infested pod that reaches out and latches onto nearby enemies, pulling them in. Parasitic Link, A strange ability, but essentially Nidus connects himself to another being, taking or giving power strength. And lastly is Ravenous. Costing stacks, this creates an area of infested. This area spawns maggots which go out and kill enemies, all while providing an area of healing for Nidus and his teammates. There are some fun builds you can make with Nidus. If you can get used to this frame, you'll be able to have an absolute blast. Nezu. I like to imagine Nezu as a kind of Tron character due to the ring it uses. I don't have much to say about Nezu, not the biggest powerhouse on the block, however I can say she is a ton of fun and has abilities no other frames come close to. My favourite by far, and the main reason I love Nezu so much, is the first ability, Firewalker. This ability leaves a trail of fire wherever Nezu walks. Now this combined with the Tron ring, honestly straight up Tron character. Sticking with that fire theme, we've got Blazing Chakram, hurling a flaming ring towards enemies that sets them ablaze and making them more vulnerable to damage. This also can be used like a teleport. If activated while the ring is still flying, Nezu will just straight up teleport to the ring's location. Next is Warding Halo, and honestly it's not that inspired. I just see it as another Rhino skin. Nezu uses her ring to give her protection for a base amount of armor. However, while active, it does damage enemies that do get too close, so I guess that's at least something, you know? Finishing off with Divine Spears, an ability which impales nearby enemies on spears that erupt from below. Not the craziest of abilities, but it is kind of unique. I'll be honest, I picked this frame mainly because I love her first ability, but there is definitely some unique stuff that you can get going with this frame. You'll just have to try it and find out what else. Yes, it's time. I've been a big fan of Mag for a long time. In fact, Mag was my first ever prime frame, and I never looked back. Although I have since semi-abandoned her, Mag has always held a big place in my heart. Recently becoming a lot more popular due to Relentless Zen's Infinity Mag build and video. But honestly, outside of that, Mag is very personalized. I love to run a build around spamming her first ability. A close friend runs her for her fourth ability. You know a frame is good if people are all running different builds and are still having fun. So how does she work? Well, Mag's one is called Pull, and it's pretty simple. It pulls stuff. Yeah, I know, it was a shock to me too. However, I love to run this as a spam ability and keep all the enemies rolling on the floor as they slowly die, being pulled constantly in different directions. Mag's 2 is Magnetize, which when activated on an enemy creates a field around them, where all bullets are attracted to the middle. Really cool for wiping out squads or locking down choke points, and is actually the focus of that build Zen did that I was talking about. Link for that in the description. Polarize. Although it doesn't get much love, Mag's third ability is great. It sends a wall of energy that depletes enemy shields and armor, and in turn replaces Mag's shields as well as their teammates. Lastly, we have Crush, which is very much something you would have seen before. Essentially, Mag becomes Magneto and just kills people by crushing them. By magnetizing their bones or something, I don't know. People die, man. Although, all this is sick, I rarely see anyone playing her, excluding the occasional endurance run. I'm hoping with the current spike of interest that she returns to the scene as a popular frame. That's it for me today though. My top 10 list of unique frames that you have to try. For you vets watching right now, I know I probably didn't pick what you wanted. Why not let me know in the comments your top 10 that you think people should give a go at that don't. We will be testing out some fun builds with these frames over in our Twitch streams on twitch.tv/robostyle. So chuck us a follow and I hope to see you there. In the meantime, however, go and give a shot to some of these awesome frames, and I will catch you in the next video. Robo out.